Today marks the 49th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Yesterday, the city of Memphis unveiled a historical marker at the Memphis International Airport honoring the slain civil rights leader. The display includes pictures as well as a plaque that noted Memphis was the site of King's final flight. What many people may not realize is that April 4th was also the day that just 1 year before he was killed, Dr. King denounced the U.S. war in Vietnam in a speech called Beyond Vietnam, a time to break the silence.
I speak as a child of God and brother to the suffering poor of Vietnam. I speak for those whose land is being laid waste, whose homes are being destroyed, whose culture is being subverted. I speak for the poor of America who are paying the double price of smashed hopes at home and death and corruption in Vietnam. I speak as a citizen of the world, for the world as it stands aghast at the path we have taken. I speak as one who loves America, to the leaders of our own nation. The great initiative in this war is ours. The initiative to stop it must be ours.
Dr. King's daughter, the Reverend Bernice King, recently spoke about why her father decided to speak out against the war and the response.
He faced heavy criticism. SCOC came under attack in terms of financially. But my mother had been encouraging him to lend his voice to the peace struggle because he really felt that there were three evils that we were faced with in the world. He called them the triple evils of poverty, racism, and militarism. He felt there was an interplay between the three. And so if he was going to be that leader of integrity and a leader who was congruent, then he had no other choice. And so that's why he called it time to break silence. As a minister, he felt that he had to speak out to be true to the ministry of Jesus Christ.
Three evils: poverty, racism, and militarism. Still on our panel, we have Dr. Greg Carr, we have Avis Jones-Weaver, and Brandon Cooper, and joining us, the lovely Kim Keenan, President and CEO, Multicultural Media, Telecom, and Internet Council, but also formerly the head Black woman in charge at the NAACP. So, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Listen, It seems I was listening to the speech from Dr. King last night. I went to sleep listening to it, woke up listening to it this morning, and we're still there.
Of course. Well, I mean, King...
We're still there.
Yeah, I mean, King had been really agonizing over this for several years, as early as '65. And when you look at the teenagers in Mississippi, the Mississippi Freedom Schools, they came out against the Vietnam War at their conference in Mississippi in 1964. And so the young people were pushing him, Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, and others. But, ultimately, King says we have to go beyond national allegiances. There's a moral imperative. And so when he sets that up, this isn't just about being anti-war. This is about connecting poverty, militarism, profit over human beings. And he took all kind of hell. The Washington Post, the New York Times, the Pittsburgh Courier. He wasn't popular. 50 years later, we look back and say, oh, Dr. King. But as he said, you got to take the right stand in moments of controversy. And I think that's why we still remember this speech.
And one of the things that he talks about, if we can just break them down one at a time, he talks directly about nationalism, Brandon. He talks about how it's a danger that we can be so kind of country-centric, that our focus is so much on the country that we don't see the hurt and the pain. He was describing the children being slaughtered in the street in Vietnam, and how, we sent our Black brothers, our young Black boys, to fight alongside white boys for rights for others in another country that they themselves did not enjoy in our own land. Speak about nationalism, and I don't know which side.
We'll find out in a second.
I'm looking at you. I don't know.
Let me find out in a second.
So, all right.
To your point, 100% agree. I think in my generation, I'm thinking of one on the panel right now who went to high school people who are now dead because of their serving overseas, and so I understand that it's hard for us to send $1 trillion of treasure in the Middle East. And we have schools, I'm from Maryland and Baltimore, I went to school a couple weeks ago, they had 10 computers in the whole school, hundreds of students is there. So I definitely agree, I may not be a typical Republican in that sense, but I definitely agree that the militarism and the aggressive foreign policy we have can be scaled back just a little bit. But also, I'll say again, as far as our country, I think we do need to worry more about our countries. We got things, infrastructure breaking down, schools, a lot of things that need funding and need attention. And I think we should put the focus away from the Middle East and back to our own country.
But it doesn't have that attention in the budget. I mean, if you look at the budget that this person has put forth, the psychological, pathological liar in chief has put forth, it is heavily weighted toward militarism and divesting out of everything else, including education, including health, including everything that people need to survive. So we're still struggling with this issue of militarism versus poverty versus racism. We're still in this dynamic 50 years later.
Yeah, at the time that Dr. King gave this speech, one of the organizations that stepped out against the speech was the NAACP.
Yeah.
Phew, we've come a long way.
You know what? What's sad is, you don't always get it right in real time, and I feel pretty comfortable that people at NAACP recognize if you were to ask anybody today, they would come on and they would say, absolutely, this was the wrong way to go. But I mean, it really just shows you he really believed that it's not about doing what's popular. It's not about doing what's popular politic. It's about doing what's right. And this was a moment of conscience. Remember, he writes that letter from a Birmingham jail, and he writes to other clergy and says, how can you sit by? How can you believe in God and sit by and see my people treated this way? And so he had to go inside and say, how can I ask them to do what I am not prepared to do? And I think that's what's so wonderful about Martin Luther King's words is that he weaved in themes that are current. I mean, he could have written a speech yesterday, right? And I love it how it says, we live in a world now where it's all about tit for tat. You guys were just talking about that, right? They did it to us, so we're going to do it to them. And so now there's no more party, really. There's just people fighting against red and blue, and they're not worried about the people. And I'm telling you, they're all going to suffer in the end. I almost hate, I don't want to be on any side anymore because I just feel like they're not on the side of the people. They're so caught up in we have to win because we're the Dems, or we have to win because we're the Republicans, and nobody's worried about where they're leaving the people in these arguments that leave us with militarism, racism, and poverty.
Speaking of people and clergy who have been fighting for the people for many years, we have on the phone Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. Reverend Jackson, welcome.
Good morning. I'm in Memphis, Tennessee today.
In Memphis, Tennessee.
It's so sad in terms of what has happened here, but the challenges remain before us.
Well, what can you tell us, Reverend Jackson, about Dr. King's speech then and the controversy of being willing to step forward and take that stand then, and how we can apply that now?
When Dr. King was killed the week before or the month before, a Harris poll had him 55% negative among the blacks and 72% negative among the whites. The whites, because they were preconditioned to be against him because of, among other things, basic civil rights. But black leadership in the main had said he was wrong for diverting attention from civil rights to the war. He said that the money designed for the war on poverty at home was going to the war in Vietnam, so the resources were drying up. And that was one reason he was against the war in Vietnam. He thought the war itself had no moral foundation. That to be bombing people, 3 million Vietnamese were killed, and 55,000 Americans were killed. He said he had to address that. And so today we find ourselves with an ever-expanding military budget on the one hand, expanding poverty on the other, and shifting resources in a ridiculous way to the very wealthy. That would come right back to poverty and capitalism and racism.
Well, and that's the concern. I was just saying, Reverend Jackson, in listening to his speech, the issues that he outlined are the same issues we are facing now. In some ways, especially where voting rights are concerned, people had more rights then, just after the passing of the Voting Rights Act, than they do now. What is it that we can be doing?
Well, the difference is that after 1965, we had the protected right to vote, federally protected right to vote, for the first time since 1880, in 85 years. Attorney General Sessions called that intrusion on states' rights. And so until 2013, until Shelby, we had the protected right to vote. And it was not just for blacks, though we did the majority of the dying, so did Louis and so did Frederick and Chain and others die in that struggle. but blacks could not vote. White women could not serve on juries. 18-year-olds could not vote, those serving in Vietnam. You couldn't vote on campuses. You couldn't vote bilingually. We had protected rights to vote. In 2013, when the Voting Rights Act was undercut, decapitated in the real sense, Sessions celebrates the return to states' rights. He decries federal involvement. So in many ways, the Voting Rights Act of 65 was far more powerful than the Voting Rights Act of the Roberts Court in 2013. You're right about that.
So, Dr. Avis, Reverend Jackson raises a point, I agree with. White women and other minorities have benefited as much or more so from the civil rights actions of people of color, and Reverend Jackson said we're the ones who did most of the dying. Absolutely. But they benefited. What is it that we can do? I'm trying to be progressive in this show in order to get that message across, because I see people, I was at the march, I see people crying in the streets now about this president who seemed to be asleep at the wheel last November.
Reverend Jackson. We're more integrated than we think we are. For example, when you raise the military budget by $50 billion, and Homeland Security and raise the budget on that, and you cut budget in education by $9 billion. You cut HUD by $6 billion. There are more whites affected than blacks. And what whites really realize, you cut Planned Parenthood, you're cutting white women in the majority, with all of us in that same situation. When you cut affordable health care, there are many whites who really did want affordable health care, but they didn't want Obamacare.
That's right.
They want the omelet, but they didn't want the eggs.
That's right.
Blinded by hatred. So when you deal with public policy, it's not ethnic policy, it's public policy. And all these public bills, when I looked at a young girl, Morgan, shoot the basketball last week and won the game with Mississippi State against Connecticut, everybody rejoiced. If Richard Holmes hadn't got in Mississippi State in 1964, she couldn't have gone to court to shoot the ball.
That's right.
That was a Fannie Lou Hamer shot she made.
That's exactly right.
That was a Medgar Evers shot she made.
That was a Medgar Evers shot. Oh, you are so right. Preach, Reverend Jackson, this morning. Okay, we have to go to the break. Thank you so much, Reverend Jackson, for all that you do, staying on the wall for all of us.
A peaceful protest turned deadly. 37-year-old black man was shot and killed by Baton Rouge police. His hands are in the air, and you still get shot by the cops.
Oh my God, please don't tell me he's dead.
We're not gonna let hate define us.
Race is a big part of this.
If truly all lives matter, then all lives need to matter equally. What we require is action. What we require is accountability. We understand that black lives do matter, and we will keep focused on this issue.
NewsOne Now, every weekday morning at 7 on TV1.